Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Another day, another chapter, and in this case, 5 chapters, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. 6 chapters. Sorry, I can't count, but that's okay. We're going to cover Job 22 through 27, and basically, we're going into the third round of interrogation from Job's friends who are there to supposedly comfort him. But what we've seen so far is nothing but accusations. They're assuming some wrongdoing on Job's part, and they're saying because he's going through all this suffering, there must be a reason for it. There must be some hidden sin or something evil that he has done to deserve all of this. So up to this point in the book of Job, these conversations between Job and his compadres have been pretty intense. Um, we've seen a few rounds of speeches. We've seen this from all three of his friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. So 3 different guys coming at Job, getting in his face, telling him that he must have done something crazy. Just confess, Job, confess! But all throughout these speeches and these arguments from his friends, there's one central argument that they're offering. If Job is suffering this much, he must have done something terrible. But now, as we get to chapters 23 through 27, the debate between Job and his friends reaches sort of this breaking point. The accusations become more specific, the frustration grows stronger both from the friends and from Job, and Job begins standing more firmly on his integrity. So, to kick things off in chapter 22, we got our good pal Eliphaz. He's going to speak again, but this time he stops speaking in general terms and he starts to kind of accuse Job of specific sins. He claims Job must have been unjust towards the poor. In verse 5 of chapter 22, it says, "No, it's because of your wickedness. There's no limit to your sins. For example, you must have lent money to your friend and demanded clothing as security. Yes, you stripped him to the bone." Then he continues to list these other supposed crimes, or these crimes that he sort of believes Job must have done, like taking pledges from the poor, like withholding water from somebody that was thirsty, or like sending widows away empty-handed even though they were in need of some help. But here's the problem with Eliphaz's argument. There's no evidence of any of this stuff anywhere in the book of Job. There's no evidence that Job did any of these things. And Eliphaz moves from simply guessing what has caused all this suffering from Job, and now he's gone right into assuming the worst. He tells Job that the solution is this. In verse 23 of chapter 22, it says, "If you return to the Almighty, you will be restored, so clean up your life. If you give up your lust for money and throw your precious gold into the river, the Almighty himself will be your treasure." In Eliphaz's mind, Job just needs to confess his sins, and everything will go back to normal for him. So, how does Job sort of react or respond to this? In chapter 23, Job responds to Eliphaz, and he responds not by attacking his friends, but by expressing a deep desire. He wishes he could bring his case directly before God. He says in verse 3 of 23, "If only I knew where to find God, I would go to his court. I would lay out my case and present my arguments. Then I would listen to his reply and understand what he says to me. Would he use his great power to argue with me? No, he would give me a fair hearing." So Job believes that if he could just stand before God and explain his situation, the truth would be known, the truth would come out. And Job makes this incredible statement of trust in verse 10. It says this, "But he knows where I'm going, and when he tests me, I will come out as pure as gold." That's good. I heard a statement the other day that sort of lends itself to this. Fire is the test of gold. Adversity is the test of strong people. So anyhow, take with it what you will. I thought it fit. In any case, even though Job can't understand why he's suffering, he still believes that God sees everything. And in chapter 24, Job again challenges the idea that wicked people are always punished immediately. He describes all these injustices happening around the world, like people exploiting the poor or the vulnerable suffering. And oftentimes it seems that justice is delayed or sometimes seemingly doesn't come at all. So then we move into chapter 25, and this is our good friend Bildad again. And this time, Bildad's response or his speech is kind of a short one. It's only 6 verses long in chapter 25, and he basically repeats the one idea that God is holy and that humans are small and sinful. In verse 4, he says, "How can a mortal be innocent before God? Can anyone born of a woman be pure? God is more glorious than the moon. He shines brighter than the stars. In comparison, people are maggots. We mortals are mere worms. But at this point, you kind of get the sense that Job's friends are running out of arguments to bring to Job. They keep repeating the same ideas, the same points, but they can't explain Job's situation. In chapter 26, Job, he answers again, and there's a little bit of sarcasm in his voice. He says in verse 2, "How you have helped the powerless, how you have saved the weak, how you have enlightened my stupidity, what wise advice you have offered. Where have you gotten all these wise sayings? Whose spirit speaks through you?" Job is hilarious. In other words, Job is saying, "Wow, you guys have been an amazing help, and I just can't believe I didn't listen to you sooner." But then Job starts describing the greatness and the power of God. He talks about God's control over creation, over the heavens, over the earth, and Job reminds his friends that these things are only a glimpse of God's power. Verse 14 says, "The foundations of heaven tremble, they shudder at his rebuke, but by his power the sea grew calm, by his skill he crushed the great sea monster. His spirit made the heavens beautiful, and his power pierced the gliding serpent. These are just the beginning of all that he does, merely a whisper of his power. Who then can comprehend the thunder of his power?" Then Job makes a strong declaration. He refuses to falsely confess to sins that he didn't commit. Verse 5 of chapter 27 says, "I will never concede that you are right. I will defend my integrity until I die. I will maintain my innocence without wavering. My conscience is clear for as long as I live." Job is suffering deeply, but he refuses to abandon the truth about his life just to appease his friends. And good on you, Job, for that. All right, so that concludes chapter 27. So that's going to wrap up today's video. So, what are the things that we can pull from this for our lives today? The first thing I think is that assumptions can often lead to false accusations. Our friend Eliphaz began offering advice to Job, but now he's sort of inventing sins that Job never himself committed. And when people assume the worst about others, they often end up causing more damage than the original problem. And it's just a dangerous ground to sort of walk on. You know what they say about assuming. You know what they say. I'm not going to say it, but you know. The second thing is that I think we all need to understand that God sees what other people cannot. See, Job's friends believe that they fully understand Job's situation. But we, as the reader, we already know something that these guys don't know, and that's that God knows the truth about Job's character. And truth matters more than human opinion. Let me say that again. Truth matters more than human opinion. And last but not least, I think integrity matters even when life seems unfair, even when life is unfair. I love that Job refuses to confess to these sins that he didn't commit just to make his suffering stop. He holds on to his integrity, he holds on to the truth, and sometimes the hardest thing to do in a painful situation is to simply stay truthful about who you are. And Job does a really good job and sets a good example, a good model for all of us to follow. All right, what about me? What about you? Have you been accused of something that you didn't do? Probably not, because you're perfect. I know I have. Or how about this one? When life seems unfair, how do we hold on to integrity without losing hope? How do we stand on truth even though all these opinions and voices around us are saying, "Just confess! Confess these sins!" I'm not sure. I don't know. But it's a question that I'm going to ponder and think about, and I challenge you to do the same. All right, here's my kind of last thought about these cluster of verses. Job 22 through 27. So by this point in the story, Job's friends, they're convinced that they have the answer to Job's problems, to Job's suffering. But their arguments start to fall apart because the truth is God's ways are deeper than human assumptions. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And even when the world misunderstands us, God still knows our story. The same God who sees our hidden struggles, he sees our hidden prayers, our silent prayers. He sees the unseen integrity that we exercise in our life. That same God, when he finally steps in to reveal the truth and restore what is lost, then all people are going to be able to say is, "Won't he do it?"